Morning to everyone from a rather grey and drab Belfast. So the beautiful blue sky you see over my shoulder is not real. I've got my stopwatch here, so I'm going to start that to ensure that I stay as close as possible within the time frame. I'd like to start by thanking the Ona Institute for the invitation to contribute to this morning's conversation. And I like that term, conversation. And you should be pleased to know that I'm only going to use 2 PowerPoint slides to attract your attention. There's nothing worse than death by PowerPoint on a Saturday morning. So Eamon's going to assist me, I understand, to put those up. And if it works, it's great. It does work. That's wonderful. The question at the top, of course, the core of the conversation this morning is clear and succinct. And it can be addressed from a great variety of perspectives. And we're going to hear different perspectives this morning. The one that I'm taking is political, or more specifically, one concerned with public policy. So if you look at the slide there, there's a name on the second bullet point, Karl Deutsch, a Czech social and political scientist, a renowned person in his life. He offers the following description of politics and public policy in democratic institutions, and I believe this definition helps inform the question we're considering. So Deutsch talked about public policy as the process of making binding authoritative decisions on the allocation of scarce resources without recourse to violence. Would you believe I learnt that in 1982 on a course at Queen's? Some things you do remember. Governments and administrations make binding authoritative decisions all the time on behalf of the citizens who've elected them on how the resources of the state or a region will be put to best use in providing public services. And one of those public services is clearly school education. Decisions on school expenditure require justification based on the worth of a business case. And that's the key theme of my short input this morning, the theme of justification. But if it's a public policy perspective, we need to start with an examination of the purpose of education from a public policy perspective. Now, the British Schools Minister, Nick Gibb, addressed this very matter in 2015. And this is where we move from highly sophisticated Zoom to something much more manual, which is how I'm going to put my notes in front of me. But here's the definition that Gibb used. Education is the engine of our economy. It is also the foundation of our culture and an essential preparation for adult life. And these three objectives are at the heart of the education system. He goes on, we have a responsibility to educate the next generation of informed citizens, introducing them to the best that has been said and thought, and instilling in them a love of knowledge and culture for its own sake. But education also is about the practical business of ensuring that young people receive the preparation they need to secure good jobs, a fulfilling career, and have the resilience and moral character to overcome challenges and succeed. I think that's a wonderful definition from a public policy perspective. There's other perspectives, of course, but that's coming from governmental. And I have no doubt that this type of thinking applies to governments throughout Europe and the wider world. And therefore, Nick Gibb's position on the purpose of education is a useful yardstick by which to consider the worth of Catholic schools. Now, Catholic schools in Northern Ireland are publicly funded and sit comfortably within the wider education system here. And that gives rise to two considerations. Firstly, the context for public policy on education in Northern Ireland, and secondly, the rationale for Catholic schools being publicly funded, because they're not publicly funded in other parts of the world. So you'll see a little bullet point on my slide, Northern Ireland context. So what is the relevant context in Northern Ireland? Well, today Northern Ireland is a pluralist democracy administered with reference to the Good Friday Agreement of 1998. And that international agreement has a commitment to note partnership, equality, and mutual respect as the basis of relationships. And I think it's very important that those three themes are noted. Northern Ireland has obviously a diverse population, a significant ethno-political and cultural differences, as well as a legacy, as we know, of related conflict. It has a strong Christian affiliation from different religious traditions. It is a relatively poor place by Western European standards, and it has a weak economy dominated by the public sector. And I believe these characteristics have a bearing on public policy. So Eamon, if you wouldn't mind putting up the next slide for me. Now, some people, often looking from the outside in, label the publicly funded school system here as segregated and claim that teaching children separately based on religion is abandoning them to parcels of hate. I mean, these are indeed strong words from President Michael D. Higgins, and he argues that the so-called segregated system can no longer be, note, justified. In the interest of debating issues with wisdom and respect, one has to acknowledge his viewpoint, which I believe is ideologically based. However, others are confident in articulating another viewpoint. President Higgins spoke about justification. So let's examine that matter as it applies to the worth of Catholic schools in Northern Ireland. Simple definition. First of all, Catholic schools, universities and colleges the world over seek to provide a distinctive form of high quality education which conjoins, on the one hand, reason, knowledge, and understanding with, on the other hand, faith. They make significant and highly valued contributions to the countries in which they are located. They respond to need, often by the poor and marginalized. And that can certainly be said for Catholic schools all over the world. Now, I believe, unlike President Higgins, that there are a multitude of reasons to justify their continued existence in our public education system. And here are just some of them. 456 schools would not be funded by the Department of Education Northern Ireland if there was not a robust business case to provide such a public service. It's as simple as that. That's how government works in allocating what Deutsch called scarce resources. Catholic schools are fully integrated into our education system in all respects, and they're accountable for their educational outcomes. They follow the Northern Ireland curriculum. They follow the public examination system. Their outcomes and standards are regularly and rigorously evaluated by the Education and Training Inspectorate. Education standards in Catholic schools are high, and there's a culture of continuous improvement, which is manifest in school development plans, which are checked by the ETI. The schools are deeply embedded in their local communities. That's a very important point. And they're often centres for young people of cultural excellence in music, art, sport, and so many aspects of community development in our towns and villages and rural areas are centred around the Catholic school. They attract a diverse range of pupils. They're very popular with parents and pupils alike. In fact, demand for places is high. And in some locations, the supply is not sufficient to meet demand. They have an outstanding reputation for pastoral care. The schools have shown a very deep commitment to shared education and its associated aims of peace building, reconciliation, and sometimes the one that's left out, social justice. Highly educated graduates of Catholic schools make essential contributions to the Northern Ireland economy in the areas such as inward investment. Catholic schools are welcoming to the thousands of newcomer children, including refugees, who often excel in them. There was a wonderful story in the Irish News earlier this week about young people in St. Patrick's College in Dungannon. I think 70% of the school population there comes from what we might describe as newcomer children. Let's go back to this very old-fashioned approach, but there we go. I'll continue. Catholic schools enjoy outstanding support from their professional leaders, and by that I mean head teachers and principals, the teachers themselves, other staff, as well as from highly supportive sectoral bodies, the Council for Catholic Maintained Schools, CCMS, and the Catholic Schools Trustee Service, CSTS. In addition, and this must never be forgotten about, there is the voluntary service of hundreds of highly motivated and very capable school governors. And they're just some of the reasons. Catholic schools have demonstrated a capacity to inspire people to give of their very best for the benefit of their pupils. There are many more reasons to take account of, but I trust that the point has been sufficiently made. Catholic schools are not perfect, of course. but they do provide a really top-class public service. A society like Northern Ireland, which has a diverse population, repeat that again, with a strong Christian affiliation, which is relatively poor and has a weak economy, certainly needs the type of schools which I have just described. Anywhere in the world would be delighted to have the type of schools that I've just described. Now, it also needs a range of other school types to address diverse needs. I'm referring here to controlled schools, integrated schools, and Irish medium schools. Each type of school has a role to play in Northern Ireland. The existence of a range of school types is not a source of inefficiency. That's looking at public provision through a certain lens. Rather, the diversity of schools reflects parental demand in a particularly diverse set of circumstances. Accommodating diversity successfully brings with it additional costs, which are built into the public expenditure envelope. We are not living in a country like Finland, which has a very homogeneous population. Our situation is more akin to the co-associationalism that you might find in Belgium or Switzerland, where stability is achieved through power sharing, which it is here, which brings me right back to the characteristics of Northern Ireland. It's when we acknowledge that in our particular circumstances, we can talk of having an education system which demonstrates unity in diversity. And I think that's an important point to stress with the forthcoming review of education. So you'll see in my slide there, it asks about Catholic schools and religious education. I'll have a few to express on this, and I'm keeping a good eye, I hope, on this stopwatch. Yes. So my argument is that Catholic schools are worth keeping here as a public service. They are, however, in a constant process of renewal to keep in step with changing times. As regards teaching methods over the past decades, we have witnessed a transformation from the dominance of the didactic approach to one which emphasizes the empowerment of students to think for themselves. And that has implications for religious education today. And from that, I do not believe we can talk today of Catholic schools handing on the faith. The challenge for religious education in schools today is great, but we observe teachers rising to it, making religious education relevant to the lives of pupils and society in general, adapting new pedagogy and developing new learning resources. Pupils in Catholic schools today receive a high quality religious education. But critically, it is they, that is the pupils, who will decide if that education they've received transforms into faith development. Catholic educators lay foundations, and we pray as a church that the young people in our schools will be guided in faith by the Holy Spirit. I've come to the final point, and you might say, what is this man talking about? Are Catholic schools worth keeping in Scotland? Well, if there are doubts about the worth of Catholic schools in Northern Ireland, there would appear to be no doubts in our nearest non-European Union neighbour, Scotland. And I would ask if Eamon could play for me, please, a short video clip to emphasize what I'm saying. So let's see if the technology works. If it doesn't, I have a simple backup method here. So even if it's not going to work, just let me know. Right, I think we're having problems there. I'm just going to go to my my smartphone, and I'm going to play a little clip for you.
We are celebrating a national success story. The partnership between church and state, which began in 1918, hasn't just endured, it has prospered, and it has done so in a way that has benefited all of our country. So it follows from all of that my main message in this morning's lecture is actually a very simple one, but it is one that I speak from the heart. The Scottish Government is an unequivocal supporter of Catholic schools. We value the contribution that Catholic schools make to modern Scotland, and we want that contribution to continue in the years ahead. And so we will continue to work with local authorities, the Catholic Church, and organisations such as the St Andrews Foundation and the Scottish Catholic Education Service to ensure that Catholic schools do continue to flourish.
So there we go. If I may repeat some words that were used by Nicola Sturgeon, it follows from what I have said and what we have learned about public policy in Scotland that Catholic schools are certainly worth keeping in Northern Ireland. And finally, wouldn't it be a sign of progress if our local political leaders collectively celebrated the role of Catholic schools in Northern Ireland and the local media gave credit where it is due? So I'll stop on that note, and I thank you for listening to my contribution.